Welcome back to Daytime. Well, you know what? When you're writing a book, there are so many things that you have to think about to put the story together. In the case of our next guest, one of the ways she has woven her Earth's Pendulum trilogy is with food. Plays a very important part, and we'll find out why from Yvonne Hertzberger, who is the author of Earth's Pendulum trilogy. Welcome back again.
Thank you.
You know, it was when you were here, we were talking about your third book in the trilogy, The Dreamt Child, and you were just getting ready to launch it and going.
Right.
And we happened to have somebody cooking food in our studio that day,
right.
and you said, by the way, you know, food plays a pretty important part in my books.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating. So you've come back to kind of explain why food is so important in the books that you write.
Yeah, when you create a world, because my books are generalized as fantasy, when you create a world, you have to, part of the setting is how do people eat, where do they eat, what do they eat, and what part does that play in that society and in that culture. And so I had a lot of fun actually doing this.
Well, one of the things I was really fascinated, reading through an interview that you did, you said, you know, even though this is fantasy and it's a world that's kind of set apart, you really want your readers to feel like they're part of it.
Right.
And one of the ways you can draw them in and create that kind of atmosphere that they know and recognize is with food. Yeah. And that's what you've done.
Yeah. And of course the climate that my books take place in is sort of similar to where we live right here. So you and I made the connection between, you know, Nutrition Month and the 100-mile diet, and I thought that this actually jived quite nicely with the idea of the 100-mile diet, because the society that I wrote my books in is an isolated society that doesn't have any trade coming in. So they had to grow everything themselves. And
so what they would be eating in the book are things that they would forage for or bake themselves or create themselves then.
Yeah. So, and they had baked goodies too. I mean, their only sweetener was honey, but they could bake with sourdough, and so I've brought in some experiments of mine, a currant bread and some honey cakes comes up a lot in my book. So I experimented and found a recipe that I can call honey cakes, which is what those little muffiny things are.
So most of the breads you said would be a dense, heartier, nuttier. Wheat wouldn't be involved necessarily in this.
No, I've used spelt in mine, and if you want to see how dense it is, I can actually break that one open if you like.
Oh, let's see. Oh.
So, you know.
Oh wow, that's a hearty bread.
Yeah, but it's good. I tasted it.
Perfect. And you made these in your own kitchen.
Yeah.
Another one of the items that you said would have been prevalent. We've got nuts. Mm-hmm. We've got some berries.
Yeah, raisins, currants, dried apples. Dried beans would have played a big part, peas and beans, and root vegetables, of course, in the winter. But the one thing I couldn't bring was all the meats, because they would have had game. They would have hunted, you know, wild boar, deer, rabbit, and then they would have raised sheep and some cattle, not too many cattle, but of course geese, ducks, chickens, and so they would have had eggs as well.
This really speaks to the research that you must have done, that it had to be part of these books. First of all, I mean, it's one thing to research for one book. This is a trilogy, so the consistency throughout had to be there, even though the eras were changing a little bit as the books went on.
Well, they wouldn't change a lot, because we only went across a couple of generations, but yeah, there are different regions in the book and in the books, and so of course people would have brought in their little specialties. You know, well, my cheese is better than your cheese, or you know, and the harvest festivals would have sort of highlighted those.
Well, it's fun because this is giving me a little bit of sort of the inner workings of your mind and the process of putting the book together, because, you know, long before you've got the story developed, you've got to have an idea of what this is going to look like, what this era is going to be, how it's going to be, and then sort of research everything to go with that to keep it consistent and true to the tale.
Yeah, the one thing that would have been different in that era from ours is that bake ovens were outside the home, with the exception of possibly in the big castle.
Okay.
But everyone would have baked outside their home, because the huts and the cottages would have only had a hearth where they could hang a kettle or whatever. but baking, they built their ovens outside.
Well, and the drinks were different too, and there are a lot of teas in your books. But I guess we call them teas, but technically they're not. They wouldn't be really teas.
Yeah, they'd be tisanes or herbal teas, actually. Yeah, and each tea had its own purpose. White pine needle tea, for instance, has vitamin C. And so it would have been used a lot in the wintertime when they wouldn't have had fresh fruit. Sage is supposed to be for strength. Raspberry leaf is a woman's tea, so they recommended it for pregnant and laboring women. Yeah, so, yeah, quite a bit of well, chamomile is calming, obviously. So.
Was there any of this when you were doing your research for the books that kind of surprised you, or that you thought, wow, kind of changed maybe the flow of the book for you?
I think trying to figure out the hunting and the trapping and making sure that I didn't have anything in there that would have had to be brought in from the outside. For instance, they wouldn't have had tomatoes or peppers or potatoes because they come from South America. The one mistake I made possibly was having maize, which was corn, which would have been an import.
Oh. But I bet nobody picked up on that.
No.
I see some of the vegetables you've got. I mean, we've got root vegetables, hardy vegetables here. One of the things they did, and when you sort of alluded to the 100-mile diet before, one of the things that's in your books, we have to remember, is seasonal eating, because this is pre-refrigeration. There was no refrigeration. There was nothing. So you ate what was in season, and very few things could actually be preserved to carry over to another season.
Yeah. Yeah. Meat was salted a lot. They would have, being an island, they would have had sea salt. But aside from that, that would be their only way of preserving.
And the only other thing I think that you said were some of the berries, because they would put them in honey.
Yes.
And that was a way of preserving them.
That's right.
And that spoke to my sweet tooth, Yvonne.
I've got one of those.
And then finally, just finishing off with a little bit of cheese and some of the nuts, or the legumes that they were able to.
Yeah, the dried legumes. Now, that's a sheep's cheese, because mutton and sheep would have been much more popular and common than cattle.
So after the trilogy, are we going to see an accompanying cookbook, maybe, Yvonne, go on with this, since food plays such an important part? I mean, you could give us the recipe for this, for the loaf and that. Ever thought of that?
Well, I could give you the recipes for these two things, but because they're so dense, I don't know how many people would actually enjoy them.
Well, it's fascinating, and for anybody now to read the books and know a little bit of the background and the food and how it all ties together, to read the books becomes a little bit of a different story once you understand it all.
It would be lovely if people would do that. I'd like that.
And people can go on your website to find out how they can find the Earth's Pendulum trilogy. From Stratford author Yvonne Hertzberger. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Try a little piece of this.
Oh, please do.
Okay, I will.
The other ones
more
are sweeter.
daytime in a moment. Stay with us.
That sweet.